Welcome to another episode of History Now the Future, the show where we take a sharp look at some of the most pressing issues of today using history as our guide and the future as our destination. My name is Cory Bradford. You may know me as This is Cory from social media. And last week we saw the Democratic National Convention take place in Chicago, Illinois. A lot of folks feared that this convention could mirror some of the chaos that we saw a little over 50 years ago in the 1968 Democratic National Convention that also took place in Chicago. There were a lot of political, cultural, and social similarities within the circumstances surrounding both conventions. And even though a fair amount of protesters did descend upon Chicago this past week, ultimately, the chaotic event that we thought could occur didn't. In fact, if you were to watch the Democratic National Convention on television last week, you would think you were watching MTV's Spring Break 2004 or some shit. Like, this thing was a celebration, bitches! It's okay. In liberal circles, it's okay to say bitches as long as you're not calling women that word and instead you're referring to all in attendance. This convention totally passed the vibe check. Just a progressive rager. I mean, judging by the mood of everything going on at the convention, you wouldn't even know that there were like multiple major wars going on in the world right now. You definitely wouldn't think that there were multiple active genocides going on right now. That's right, multiple G-sides, as influencers worried about censors now refer to them as. Not just the one in Gaza. There's also one going on in Sudan, one in the Congo, maybe even some more beyond that. But no, none of that would be apparent by the vibes that this DNC celebration was giving. You wouldn't think that the economy was in trouble, or that we could be just months away from possibly reinstating an ex-president who claims he wants to be dictator for just one day. Because if you look throughout history, that's how all the great dictators did it. Yeah, they only wanted to dictate for a very short amount of time, and then they always willingly gave up power right after that. Said no one fucking ever. Dictatorships are not like the purge. They generally don't have a 24-hour ceiling to them. Now don't get me wrong. I understand that the point of these conventions is to ignite the base, to get people amped up and excited to go out and vote for that party come election time. And personally, I really enjoyed the hopeful spirit and optimistic tone that this convention conveyed. However, some of that tone ringed a little bit hollow to me because I know what Democrats are capable of when they have a lot of power. And honestly, it's usually very little. In fact, the last Democratic president who pushed forward bold, revolutionary legislation that would change society for generations to come was Lyndon B. Johnson with his Great Society policies in the 1960s. The only problem there was that he was simultaneously waging one of the most unnecessary, frivolous, god-awful wars this country has ever been involved in Vietnam. Kind of ruined the legacy of everything, you know? Beyond all the flashing lights, confetti, and Beyonce performances that never came to fruition, I just hope these inspirational speeches actually translate to real policy. I hope this isn't just a bunch of symbolic empty gestures designed to get us to vote. Former President Barack Obama mentioned the housing crisis during his speech at the convention. And it seems like the Democrats are now willing to campaign on the housing issue in America, which is kind of ironic, considering the fact that a lot of blue cities and blue states have been working with real estate developers behind closed doors to keep the housing supply low, which has in turn helped drastically increase the price of houses as well as the price of rent in the US. The NIMBY movement, otherwise known as the Not in My Backyard movement, has been fueled by wealthy progressives who live in some of the most elite areas of the country and do not want multiple family housing built near them because they believe it will drive down their property value. Now, the Republicans have harped on this democratic dichotomy by launching an odd, disingenuous, double-edged attack on the left when it comes to the housing issue. See, they blame the NIMBY movement and the wealthy progressives behind it for keeping the housing supply low while simultaneously warning suburbanites that if these new Democrats have their way, they will increase multifamily housing, which will bring low-income undesirables to suburban neighborhoods. So Republicans blame Democrats for this problem, but then say that the Democrats' solution for the problem is even worse because the problem is actually a good thing because it keeps the wrong people out of your neighborhood. Classic conservative circular logic. Now, ultimately, housing issues are mostly in the hands of local communities with some state guidelines. The federal government doesn't have much jurisdiction here. The goal for these Democrats would be to push blue states and cities to change their zoning laws in order to get more multifamily housing built, which may provide some much needed relief for working class families seeking more affordable housing options. But that's just one issue where the Democrats dug a hole for themselves and now have to climb their way out of it. An even bigger issue lies on the other side of the world in the Middle East. Did you happen to notice that not one Palestinian American got to speak on the stage at the Democratic National Convention? Not one. There was no meaningful discussion at the convention about what Israel is doing in Gaza right now. That's because the Democrats have to walk a very fine line when it comes to this issue. They have to support Israel's right to protect, defend, and secure itself, while simultaneously calling for more humanitarian aid for Gaza, more self-determination for Palestinians, and push for that elusive two-state solution for both parties involved. The problem is, those two concepts are in direct confrontation with one another because the Democrats are supporting the very country that is causing a humanitarian crisis in Gaza in the first place. That's like saying we're committed to fighting cancer, but we're still going to give the patient more cigarettes. It is simply incompatible. And there is a way to support Israel's right to exist without supporting Israel's actions. So if you are a Palestinian American, or you have family over there, or if you're suffering from the housing crisis, or if you're just generally in a bad financial state right now, then all the bright lights and celebration of the Democratic National Convention probably seemed a bit insulting to you. So my message to the Democrats would be this. You've had the party. Now it's time to get to work. Give Americans a reason, a real reason, why you would be better than the other side. And if you actually do get a chance to represent us, please do something with the power this time. Don't make Americans regret this. Welcome to Trending Down, a segment of the show where we take a look at some of the more trivial topics floating around the internet in the past week. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this situation regarding pop star Chappell Roan. Now, in full disclosure, I did not know who Chappell Roan was until like a couple of weeks ago. I had never heard of her. Maybe I had heard a song or two and didn't know who made it, but I don't listen to a lot of new music. I try to keep up with the trends and stuff, but just to be honest with you, I'm kind of stuck perpetually in the early 2000s. I don't listen to a lot of new music, so I didn't know who she was. I looked into her. If you don't know who she is, Chappell Roan, she's a fairly young pop star who's gotten really big in the last year. She's been out for like a decade, making music on the underground on YouTube and places like that. But she's gotten really popular in the last year. She's got this single Hot to Go that's really popular. She came out with a really popular and really critically acclaimed debut album last year. She's just really, really big. She's one of the big new pop stars of the last year or so. And she's starting to have some serious troubles with fame. She took to Instagram a couple of days ago to talk about some of the very problematic and predatory behavior that some of her so-called fans are showing to her. In this statement, she told her fans, hey, stop touching me in public. Stop putting your hands on me. Stop being weird with me and my family. Stop assuming things about me. And after reading her statement, I was very troubled by it. The fact that she's having to deal with all of these weird situations regarding her fame. Now, a lot of people will write this off and say, oh, she's a rich, spoiled celebrity. Who cares about what she's going through? But at the end of the day, she's a human being. She deserves respect. She deserves boundaries. And I'm glad she's speaking out on this. I'm glad that people are finally stepping up and talking about how weird it can be to be famous for something. Now, I don't have nearly the level of fame that Chappell Roan has. I don't consider myself famous at all, to be honest with you. I'm just a humble TikToker. But I do have more than 1 million followers on TikTok and thousands of followers on other platforms. The only reason you're watching this is probably because you've seen one of my TikTok skits. And those skits can get pretty big. I'm not bragging, but they get millions of views. And so I've been quote unquote TikTok famous, for about the last 4 years now. I remember the first time I ever got noticed in public for doing TikToks was like spring, summer of 2020. So over 4 years ago. Even though I'm not famous like Chappell Roan, I do have to deal with people sometimes coming up to me in public and saying, hey, you're that TikTok guy. So I haven't had any really bad in-person interactions the way Chappell Roan here is describing, but I have had some really weird interactions online. I get weird messages all the time. I get hate speech messages and threats all the time. Just this morning, someone messaged me and told me to, quote, stop spreading lies, and then called me a Jewish N-word. But they said it, they spelled it out, and they used ER in it and everything. And I don't know where that came from. I've been doing a lot of World War II content lately on TikTok, so maybe, and I'm making Germany look bad or something. Maybe that's where that came from. Not really sure. I don't really pay attention to stuff like that because those people usually have some type of weird, pathetic life. So I don't really pay attention to the hate speech and stuff like that. But I do get a lot of people who are calling themselves fans, and they message me and they get angry when I don't talk about something. I get people all the time saying, well, Cory, you're not talking enough about this, and you're not as much of an activist as we thought you were, and you're not speaking out about this, and you're not speaking out about that. What do you want from me? Like, I do the content that I think would be good for my followers and my fans, that I think it's funny, and I do it to educate and entertain, but I don't do it for really any reasons beyond that. I mean, it is my career at this point. And I think that's something that people really need to understand is that when it comes to anyone who is famous, whether they're a big celebrity like Chappell Roan, some big pop star, or whether they're just some content creator or influencer that only has a few thousand followers, but you're a fan of them, they don't owe you anything, right? The only thing they owe you is the content that they're giving you. I'm gonna cite a very old reference here. Frank Sinatra said that Humphrey Bogart told him that the only thing you owe your fans is a good performance. And 60, 70, 80 years later, that is still some of the best advice that I could give to a content creator, to an influencer, or even a celebrity that's much more famous than I. The only thing you owe your fans is a good performance. And if you are a fan, if you are a follower of me, or Chappell Roan, of anybody else for that matter, the only thing these celebrities, these content creators, these talented people, the only thing they owe you is a good performance, is good content. Beyond that, they owe you absolutely nothing. When they're performing on stage or doing a TikTok video, that is essentially their job. That's no different from you doing your 9 to 5. If you are a professional, if you work in an office, that's their office. When I'm on TikTok, when I'm on YouTube, this is basically my office. And people like Chappell Roan, you may look at it a certain kind of way because it's music and it doesn't seem like an actual real job, but that's her job. Her job is to perform, and that's all her job is. It's just to give you good content, give you good music. If you like it, then she's performing a service for you. If you don't like it, then you're not a fan of her and you can walk away from it and it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But that is her job, and everybody deserves respect in the workplace, no matter how, unusual their job may seem to you. So I applaud Chappell Roan for coming out and speaking on this issue. I hope that the fans recognize and stop being weird with her in public. I can't imagine having fans come up to me and try to touch me and do stuff like that, like she's alleging here. That just sounds awful. Guys, if you're a fan of someone, if you're a follower of someone, just enjoy the content and move on. These celebrities, these content creators, they don't owe you anything except a good performance. A Republican organization is claiming that Kamala Harris is ineligible to run for president, and they seem to be citing her race as one of the main reasons for her ineligibility. There's a group called the National Federation of Republican Assemblies, and essentially they are a far-right conservative group that makes recommendations for which candidates the Republican Party should run. They don't really care about if these candidates are actually electable or if they're good for all Americans. They just have to be ultra-conservative to get this group's backing. The group originates from California back in the 1930s, and they became a national organization around 1996. Now, this organization is going viral because of a platform and policy document that they released back in October of last year. It argued that the constitutional qualifications of presidential eligibility state that no person except a natural-born citizen shall be eligible for the office of president. Now, that part isn't very controversial because the Constitution does state that only natural-born citizens can be president. The problem is, like many things in the Constitution, the framers didn't really define what a natural-born citizen was or is. We just have to interpret that, and the most widely interpreted definition of the term is, if you were born in the U.S., and you were a citizen at the time of your birth, and pretty much everyone born on U.S. soil is automatically a citizen according to the 14th Amendment, then you're a natural-born citizen. It shouldn't get much more complicated than that, right? But according to this group, the NFRA, a natural-born citizen is someone who was born in the U.S. to parents who were U.S. citizens when the child was actually born. Now, that line of thinking doesn't come strictly from the Constitution. The organization says that they are simply citing the thinking of Supreme Court justices like Anthony Scalia and Clarence Thomas. Okay, so this group is claiming that Kamala Harris is not a natural-born citizen because neither of her parents were citizens at the time of her birth. Now, Kamala Harris was born in the United States. She was born in California, but her father is from Jamaica and did not become a citizen until around 2015, and her mother was from India. They were both legal residents of California when they had Kamala, but I don't think either of them were actual U.S. citizens at the time. Now, this group doesn't stop there. The NFRA goes on to claim that both Nikki Haley and Vivek Ramaswamy were ineligible for the Republican primaries because although they too were born in the United States, they were born to immigrant parents, which by this group's rationale means they weren't natural-born citizens either. This group also tries to cite a few Supreme Court cases to bolster its ridiculous claims, and one of the cases they cite is Dred Scott v. Sanford, otherwise known as the Dred Scott Decision. Now, the Dred Scott Decision, which is objectively the worst Supreme Court decision in United States history, essentially stated that the Constitution never intended to give citizenship to African Americans, regardless of if those African Americans were free or enslaved. So that decision, a decision that was completely overturned by the 13th and 14th Amendments, by the way, doesn't really have much to do with this broad concept of natural-born citizenship. It was simply a decision that said black folks were not citizens and could not sue in federal court, or any U.S. court for that matter, because they weren't citizens. So even mentioning that null and void ruling is simply a coded way of suggesting that Kamala Harris shouldn't be able to run for president simply because she's black. I mean, what other conclusion can we reach when you're citing a case that essentially makes that same claim? Now, the president of this organization, Alex Johnson, claims that just because this group cited the Dred Scott decision, that doesn't mean they agree with every aspect of that decision. So what aspects do you agree with? Because every single aspect of that ruling is absolutely reprehensible and rooted in white supremacy. And this has always been my biggest criticism of the far right. They know that many of the ideas they hold are inherently racist and are inherently in conflict with the concepts of freedom and justice for all Americans. So they have to beat around the bush and talk in code because if they told us how they really felt, they would just come off as bigots. And that's exactly what most of them are. They're fucking bigots. So my advice to this group and groups like it is stop being cowards. Say it with your chest. Say what you mean to say so we can know who you really are. And so you can find out just how out of touch you really are with the vast majority of true Americans. All right, guys, so thank you all for watching this episode of History Now the Future. You've probably noticed by now that this is a much shorter episode than what we normally try to do. We're going to be taking a break next week for Labor Day, so there won't be an episode Tuesday or Thursday next week. We're also going to be doing some retooling of the podcast. We're going to try to figure out some new things, some new segments. We may even bring on a panelist that will be here every week with me to have these discussions, mixing that with the monologues. And we want to get your feedback on all of this. So go to the comment section, and you can also message me privately on places like TikTok and Instagram. This is Cory pretty much everywhere, and tell me what you like about the podcast, what you think we can improve on, and just give me some of your feedback because we can definitely use that going forward as we retool this show. But we are going to have a Thursday episode this week. This week, I'm going to be interviewing Dara Star Tucker. Now, many of you may know her from social media. She's also an accomplished singer. She's been a singer for many, many years. But she is well known for her many documentaries on the entertainment industry and entertainment history. She also does some political content on social media. She has more than 1 million followers on TikTok and Instagram and different places like that. And we had a really great conversation about a month ago about some of the issues that the entertainment industry is currently going through and just the future of the entertainment industry and how us social media content creators and influencers affect the legacy media and the overall entertainment industry in general. So that was a great conversation. Make sure to check that out this Thursday on the podcast. Also, make sure to subscribe to this page so you never miss an episode. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you guys next time.